Hello, and welcome to Community Voices, where we talk to Humboldt County's movers and shakers. Today's guest, coordinator for the Eureka Chinatown project, Brieanne Mirjah de Souza. And now here's your host, Paul Bressoud.
Hello and welcome to Access Humboldt's Community Voices. I'm Paul Bressoud, your host, and today we're here with the project coordinator of the Eureka Chinatown project, Brieanne Mirjah de Souza. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Paul. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, great. You know, I always ask people first what their job is, but I'm going to add a little more to that. What your job is and what the Eureka Chinatown project is, if you could kind of give us a background so that we could start from there.
So I think these days I have a few different answers to what my job is. First and foremost, what pays the bills and a job I absolutely love is working with the Bressoud GYN Health Project up in Arcata. And I work in marketing, fundraising, and volunteer coordination with them. I am also a new mother of a 4-month-old. So usually answering to him is my primary job. and my volunteer job is, like you mentioned, project coordinator for the Eureka Chinatown project. And I think I assumed that position when I came up I guess presented the idea of memorializing the Chinatown that once stood here back in the 1800s, before the Chinese expulsion of 1885. And so by kind of bringing up the idea and bringing it forward to the community, I took on coordinating the project that kicked off in April of this year, of 2021.
And what are the goals of the project?
When the project first came about, we saw that there was a real need for awareness around our local history and the Chinese community that used to live here in Eureka and the surrounding areas. So we primarily would like to spread awareness and educate the community on the local history of the Chinese community, as well as the events of the expulsion that happened in 1885, followed by a long stretch of discrimination and prejudice that lasted until about the 1950s, and we're still feeling effects today. And really the hope is that by learning the past and excavating this history, we can learn from it and we can move forward towards a more inclusive future for our community here.
Do you find that in this task of raising awareness, you have people that didn't even know that there was a Chinatown in Eureka or knew nothing of the story of the Chinese immigrants that were here in the late 1800s?
Absolutely. It's, I think, the story that we hear most often, and I think a story that a lot of us can identify with as well. I moved up to Humboldt a few years ago, and I had no idea of the history. I had seen I am half Chinese and half West Indian. And so when I saw that there was an exhibit happening at the Clark Museum about a year and a half ago around the Chinese expulsion, it was really interesting to me. So that's where I first learned about it. And I've heard many other people say the same story. So the more we talk about the Chinatown project and what we're doing, I think we're seeing a similar theme come up and really showing the need for what we're doing and really trying to get more recognition around the Chinatown and the Chinese community that really helped to build Humboldt County as we know it.
So there are a lot of questions I have just over that last answer. The first one is a kind of chicken or the egg question, and that is, did the Chinatown project exist before the Clark Museum exhibit, or did the museum exhibit kind of ignite the passion of folks to tell this story and to start the project?
Yeah, so great question. The exhibit happened at least a year ago, if not a little bit more. And I don't think there was an initial action taken after the exhibit happened. It wasn't until maybe we all kind of had a moment to absorb it, and also there was a convergence of a rise in AAPI hate across the country, and especially down in San Francisco, our neighbor, where I think these topics started to come back up in our community and in conversations that we were having. And the history became very prevalent again, because the rise in AAPI hate is not new by any means. And the more we talked about it amongst ourselves, we realized these are reoccurring themes that continue to happen in terms of prejudice against Asian Americans and Chinese Americans specifically. So I think the Clark Museum exhibit really really gave us a chance to learn in depth about our local history. And it wasn't until about April of this year, so only a few months ago, that we really got together and started to take action in terms of excavating the history here. And the Clark has been an amazing partner throughout the Chinatown project. Katie Bush, who's their director, has been part of the project since the very beginning, since April. And she's been a big part in helping to educate a lot of the committee, as well as educating the community. So they've been hosting monthly walking tours since May, and recently just stopped in October was the last one, just due to the weather. But that's really one of the primary ways that the community has been learning about the local history here in Chinatown and the expulsion.
Let me, for the sake of the audience, the acronym, can you give us the definition of the acronym AAPI?
Yeah, sorry, I shorten it in my own lingo here. But AAPI typically stands for Asian American and Pacific Islander. And the terms that we use to identify groups of people are always growing and evolving, and we want to be inclusive, but also do not want to lump people together. So for the sake of this conversation, when I use AAPI, it's typically referring to people of Asian American descent.
Okay, now let's take another step back. The Clark Museum exhibit, fantastic and catalytic in its sense, yet happened during the pandemic. So maybe not enough people, through no fault of the museum or the people, got to see it. Was the project, did it have an extra emphasis to get the information out? That they saw the information, you guys saw the information, and then the events that were happening around the country, and now you have this, and the Clark had started the interest in it, and yet there was limited access. Did you guys feel a need to go ahead and bring the story forth even more so to the people?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really extensive history, and what typically people have learned is this very canned version of what's happened, especially around the expulsion. The very short version is that there was a Chinatown here, bounded by the blocks of E and F and 4th and 5th. And there was a white city councilman that was walking by Chinatown one evening and got caught in a crossfire, a gun shootout that was supposedly done by Chinese gang members. And none of that is really confirmed in any way. It's all very much hearsay. And anyways, the councilman did die, and it caused a big uproar and a mob to form and basically oust all the Chinese people that were here that they could. And that's a very short version. And that's the version I think a lot of us had heard before. But as we kind of delved into it and we started talking to the Clark and we saw the exhibit And we, we're a volunteer committee of about 30 volunteers, and we have a wide variety of talented folks that are part of it. Some of them are historians, some of them are professors and educators and people that have delved into this history further. And we did a lot of excavating on our own and looking at the history. And there's just so much more that we found and so much more that we still have to learn. I think primarily the history that's been told has been told from the folks that kicked the Chinese people out of the area. And we don't hear a lot of stories from the Chinese people specifically. And I mean, it makes sense. They're not here in the area anymore, and they had strong discrimination against them. So they wouldn't necessarily be public about their experiences or document their experiences, or may not have spoken the language. So, we don't see that in our local history books. And so it's a process, and we absolutely want to get the word out more. And we're working with the Clark to do that. And we hope that, people are learning, and they're learning a more well-rounded version of the local history here.
As a student of history, which I am, and I also taught it for a long time, doesn't mean I'm an expert. It just means I'm interested. It seems to me, and from reading your information online, that there's a direct correlation with the kind of feelings that were built up against the Chinese that started in 1882 with the passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act, which was a federal law prohibiting Chinese people from coming to the United States and also prohibiting them from owning land. And this anti-Chinese sentiment building up to where just 3 years later here in Eureka, you have the expulsion. Does your project draw a link between those two events?
Absolutely. And like I mentioned about learning a more balanced history, I think a lot of that is learning the background, because again, most of the common history that we know here is about the events that led directly up to the expulsion, in terms of the fatal shooting of the Councilman Kendall, when really it was a much bigger culmination of events that led up to the expulsion, not only here in Eureka, but many other Chinese expulsions along the West Coast. The Chinese people, mostly from southern China, came to the U.S. in prospective gold to work on the railroads, really to find a better life for themselves. And they came, around the 1850s, some before, some after. But this anti-Chinese sentiment didn't really start to become apparent until after the Civil War, when there was a bit of a depression. And I think there needed to be somebody to blame for the economic downfall. And Chinese people were easy to set as they were easy to other in another, in a easier way to say is they were easy to say, point the finger at and say, it's them. They're the ones that are taking your jobs. It's not us. It's not the economy. It's them. And because they look different and they speak a different language and have a culture that's different than what they knew here in America, it was very easy to point the finger and use the Chinese people as a scapegoat. So you have this strong federal push to really exclude the Chinese. You see the Exclusion Act go into play in 1882, and then you see that all disseminate into local communities. And it's just really jarring, because we're still seeing that today. We are still seeing Chinese people and Asian Americans being blamed for taking jobs in the automotive industry. I'm not sure if you've heard of Vincent Chin before, but he was a man in Detroit who was basically beaten to death because two people thought that he was Japanese and taking their jobs in the automotive industry. And then you also see this rise of what Donald Trump called the Kung Flu, right? And that Chinese people are being blamed for COVID-19. And that was something that was really apparent back in the 1800s as well. Here in Eureka, the Chinatown that was on the block of E and F and 4th and 5th Streets, there was a creek that ran through that block and down into the bay. And the city decided to cut that creek off at 4th Street to improve 4th Street, so there wasn't water running through it. And because they did that, there was kind of a pooling of water that was happening. And this is, there's a lot of waste coming from businesses and houses that's kind of pooling into this water. And so Chinatown got this reputation of being stinky and foul and disease ridden, and that you don't want to go there, in ways. And again, these are themes that we're still seeing today. So in a lot of ways, I think it's really important that we talk about them and we educate them, because if we don't, we're just going to keep seeing history repeat itself.
Speaking of history repeating itself, that was a fabulous description you just gave, that sentence, easy to other. Do you think that is the most important aspect of the historical link between the Expulsion Project and today, that we recognize that's something that's happened in this country, that we have done that in the past, or we have experienced in the past, the concept of, towards other groups, easy to other? Is that something that connects the past and the present?
Yeah, I definitely think that it's a theme that we're seeing back then and today as well, especially as our community is becoming more diverse. We don't want it to become more diverse and at the same time become segregated, right? Because we can break off into our own communities and stay away from each other in ways. And I think that's what's so important about the Chinatown Project, is that we want to shed light on the contributions that everyone has put forth, and no one should be dismissed for what they do, and who they are, and the culture that they are a part of. And it's not just looking at somebody and saying, you look different, you act different, you are different, therefore I have the right to tell you that you can't live here, or you can't be here, or you can't be part of this community. I think that is the most, it's very scary when you're getting the finger pointed at you, and it makes you fearful to live in a community where before you even say a word, somebody can look at you and say, you're different than me, therefore I'm going to treat you differently and give you different rights. Or, it just, when you can be othered in that way, it's something that hits really deep. So I do think it's very, very important then as it is now.
Well, obviously, back in the 1880s, the fact was there were things called exclusionary Chinatowns, where only Chinese people could live and they couldn't cross into other parts of the community. And this city, Eureka, had a Chinatown. And now, kind of changing gears here, you're trying to preserve that space historically. And I read on your website, and I think it's very interesting, that you have a phase one of the project to bring, an awareness to the actual physical boundaries of the Chinatown. Can you tell us about phase one of the project?
Yeah, so, I think phase one is really about awareness and education. We really want to level set and understand that there has been no recognition of the Expulsion or Chinatown in our community to date. So first, we would like to do that. So it really started off with the idea of just putting a plaque on that block of the historic Chinatown. And from there, it really snowballed. One, we had many community members come forward and say, I would like to be part of this. There's a real need for this. And so we started talking, and very quickly somebody put us in touch with city officials in the city of Eureka. We spoke with the mayor and the city manager and the community services director. And within a week, we had a conversation with them, and they were so supportive and on board. And so from that meeting, they made the suggestions of pursuing the naming of the alley that runs through the block. They have interpretive signs that there's one on the corner of E and Fish Street, as well as F and Fish Street. And they offered a panel on each of those that we could provide information around Chinatown and the Chinese community here. And then we also spoke with Co-Central Credit Union about the plaque, and they came forward and, and were again very supportive of the project and said, a plaque is great, but what about a bit more space, more space to do a monument and erect something larger than just a plaque. And so now we're working with them on a monument on the corner of E and 4th Street. And we also got in touch with the Eureka Street Art Festival, which happened in August. And they actually had one last mural spot that was open and they didn't have an artist for. And that was the mural space that is in the alleyway on the historic block of Chinatown. So we were able to pull that together very quickly. And we put up the foul mural that now stands there today. And that was back in August. And so that, again, is just recognizing that a historic Chinatown did stand here, that it doesn't stand here anymore because of the expulsion of 1885 and events afterwards. And, after that, I think that phase 2 could look like expanding awareness outside of the block of Chinatown, because Chinese people were embedded in this community outside of just that block, and doing more, taking the next step. So,
well, let me ask a couple of questions about this step. A monument. Is there an idea for the monument? Is there a contest of some sort? Is there a call out to artists to design a monument? You guys are moving at a rapid speed. It's amazing. How far is the monument along?
Yeah, the monument is in the works right now. We're working through the design aspect of it. And currently we have selected an artist that we would like to work with already. And we have a committee of about 8 volunteers that have been part of the Chinatown project this entire time. Again, very talented and passionate folks. And they are doing the deep work to create this monument, because the monument stemmed from the idea of a plaque. And, the idea of a plaque is much different than designing a monument. We were just going to come up with the text for the plaque, and it's on a square or a rectangle or whatever it is. And so, I think that we are taking a step back and taking the time to really look within ourselves and within our community to make sure that we are doing it right, because we want to say a lot with a little. So hopefully we will have something erected by Chinese New Year this year, or of next year, which would be early February. So we can have some kind of, celebrations and unveiling around that. So
by February? So all this happened from last April and has moved at this pace to February, to where you could celebrate Chinese New Year's in the traditional Chinatown in Eureka, with all this progress towards the awareness and the immortalizing of the community through these monuments and murals and whatnot. That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, let me ask this question then. Are there other groups up and down the West Coast that are also involved in this kind of awareness project? And if so, are you guys in communication with them? And then one more thing, they must all marvel at you because it's happened so fast.
So I think one of the most magical things about this project is the connections that we've been making within the community and outside of it. We also have, there have been projects like this before that I think took significantly more time. The Tacoma Reconciliation Project up in Tacoma, Washington, happened a couple years ago, and they did a whole park. So I think it was much bigger, but it's we do have some experts on our committee as well that worked on that project. Jean Failser, who is the author of Driven Out, The Forgotten War Against Chinese Americans, she also worked on the Tacoma Reconciliation Project and is a resident here in Humboldt. So we're really fortunate to have her expertise as part of this project. We also have received connections through San Francisco of people that have come up to see the project and are interested in learning more about it. There's also somebody out in Red Bluff who is interested in doing the same thing in their area. And yeah, it's been really great to connect with many folks, because again, earlier this year and the rise in AAPI hate throughout the country, I think has brought up a lot of feelings and need to bring awareness to our local Asian American history. So we are seeing it across the West Coast. And I hope that we can hopefully do some collaborations down the line and take our Eureka Chinatown project out of Eureka and beyond. And I would say that the project has been moving really quickly, one, because of the convergence of what's been happening here locally as well as nationally, in terms of, I think, Asian Americans being in the forefront of our national media. And we also have had a really supportive city and community that has really propelled us forward. And all of that has, pushed us to where we're at. When I initially thought we were gonna, work on just the plaque, again, it snowballed very quickly when it was the city and businesses that were coming forward to us and saying, we would like to offer you more. We would like to see more of this in our community. This is what we can do to help. So I think it's a lot of folks working to make this happen.
I appreciate your time. The coordinator, the project coordinator of the Chinese Expulsion Project, Brieanne Mirjah. Thank you. That's all the time we have for today. And thanks for joining us here on Community Voices.
This has been Community Voices with your host, Paul Bressoud. If you represent a nonprofit organization and are interested in being a guest on Community Voices, send an email to info@accesshumboldt.net or call 476-1798. Access Humboldt, local voices through community media.